In the time of iron kingdoms and whispered sorcery, a forgotten name shaped the fates of two bloodlines. He was a sorcerer of unspeakable power, betrayed by love and cast out by a jealous court. Wrath consumed him, and in his final act of vengeance, he cast a spell that lingered like smoke in the hearts of the living. The curse he spoke on the eve of his death was simple and cruel. From this night and each century hence, beneath the crescent moon, a prince and a princess of these cursed houses shall duel. One shall rise, one shall fall. And thus the cycle shall bind their souls until time itself unravels. The years turned into centuries, and the tale of the sorcerer became myth. But myths, as the kingdoms of Serel and Kael knew too well, have teeth. Serel was born during a violent storm, the air electric with foreboding. The midwife whispered to the queen that her daughter's birthmark, a silver crescent etched across her palm, could only mean one thing. She bore the mark of the cursed. Serel grew up surrounded by soft silks and hard truths. Her tutors taught her diplomacy, her generals taught her warfare, and her dreams taught her fear. For Serel, the curse was not an abstraction. She knew its victims. Her mother wept when she spoke of her younger brother, who had been taken by the curse before her birth. Each New Year's dawn, the court would hang mourning banners for some forgotten princess or prince slain in the cursed cycle. Serel's life, for all its finery, was a prison built from inevitability. In a distant kingdom, Prince Kael lived under the same shadow. His parents had tried to hide the curse's mark, tattooing over the crescent on his wrist with fierce black ink. But the magic remained. Kael was raised as a weapon, his kingdom investing in his survival, not out of love, but necessity. He spent his childhood training in magic and swordplay, his every lesson a preparation for the midnight duel that loomed over his life like a predator. But Kael's eyes held a quiet rebellion. Where his family saw destiny, he saw a cruel joke. Where others resigned themselves to bloodshed, he dreamed of escape. And yet, no dream, no defiance could break the pull of the crescent moon. The century mark approached like a gathering storm. As the last autumn leaves fall, Serel found herself haunted by glimpses of Kael. He appeared in her dreams, always at a distance, his face obscured by shadow, but his presence undeniable. She would wake with his name on her lips, though they had never met. One winter's evening, as snow blanketed the kingdom, Serel wandered the halls of the castle. Her footsteps muffled by silence. Her father's voice, low and grave, echoed through a half-open door. "She must be ready," he said. "There is no choice." "And if she refuses?" asked her mother. "Then she dies, as does the boy. The curse is cruel, but it demands payment." The words chilled Serel more than the frost outside. She pressed her hand to the mark on her palm, her breath catching as she felt it thrum with faint warmth. the curse was stirring. Far away, Kael stood in the snow-covered ruins of an ancient tower, the crescent moon looming overhead. His mentor, a wizened mage, watched him practice with the blade that had been passed down through generations of cursed princes. "Do you think it's fair?" Kael asked, his voice raw. "That I must kill someone I've never even met?" The mage's answer was simple. Fairness has no place in fate. The days passed, each one marked by a growing sense of dread. As the end of the year approached, the moon seemed brighter, colder. On the final night, Serel stood at her balcony, staring at the crescent moon that hung like a scythe in the sky. "This is no life," she whispered to the wind. "No life at all." And in the distant kingdom, Kael gazed up at the same moon, the cursed mark burning beneath his gloves. When the clock struck midnight, both felt the same pull, a tether of magic that called them to the ancient forest. They could not resist. The duel had begun. The forest was alive in ways no mortal could comprehend. Under the pale crescent moon, its gnarled branches twisted as though whispering secrets to one another. Frost clung to the roots like an ancient curse etched in ice. The air was thick with a silence that seemed to hum, broken only by the faint echo of footsteps. Hers to the north, his to the south. Princess Serel walked with steady purpose, though her heart quaked beneath her silver armor. Her sword, adorned with runes of protection, hung heavy at her side, each step an effort of will. She had prepared for this moment her entire life, yet the weight of it still pressed against her chest like an iron hand. The pull of the curse was a strange sensation, a thread of magic that tugged at her very soul, guiding her through the labyrinth of ancient trees. The forest seemed to bend to its will, opening a path that led her inexorably toward the center. Her thoughts turned, unbidden, to the prince. Kael. The name, barely a whisper in the annals of her kingdom, had haunted her dreams for weeks. She had never seen his face, never heard his voice, yet she felt as if she knew him in some intangible way. "What are you like?" she murmured to herself, her breath clouding in the frosty air. "Are you afraid? Do you hate me for what I must do?" Miles away, Kael's footsteps crunched through the snow. His cloak, black as midnight, swirled around him like a shadow given life. In his hand, he held the cursed blade, a weapon of obsidian and starlight that pulsed faintly, with a rhythm like a heartbeat. He had tried to resist the curse's pull, to chain himself to the walls of his chamber, but the magic was relentless. Now he walked the same path as the princess, each step carrying him closer to his fate. Kael's mind was a storm of doubt and bitterness. His dreams had been no kinder than hers. Serel's face, illuminated by moonlight, framed by sorrow, had haunted him. She was not his enemy. He knew that. The true enemy was the curse itself, a shadow that fed on the blood of innocence. "Do you feel this too?" he muttered to the darkness, his voice low and hoarse. This connection, as if we've already met. The forest conspired against their hesitation. The trees grew denser, the magic heavier. By the time they reached the heart of the woods, they both knew there was no turning back. The clearing was a circle of frozen earth, untouched by the snow that blanketed the rest of the forest. In its center stood a single twisted tree, its branches devoid of leaves, reaching upward like skeletal hands. Serel stepped into the clearing first, her breath catching as she beheld the prince. He was tall and cloaked in darkness, his face partially hidden by a mask of iron. His eyes, though, were unmistakable, piercing and filled with a sorrow that mirrored her own. Kael's grip on his blade tightened as he took in the sight of her. She was radiant, her armor gleaming in the moonlight, but there was no triumph in her stance. She looked as though she carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. For a long moment, they simply stared at one another, the silence stretching between them like a taut thread. Then Serel spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "Do you believe in fate?" Kael's lips twisted into a bitter smile. "Fate is a cruel word for a cage," she nodded, her expression softening. "I didn't think you'd hate me." "I don't." His voice was barely above a whisper. "I hate this." The cursed pull between them grew stronger, pressing on their bodies and minds. The forest itself seemed to tremble, the branches of the twisted tree creaking ominously. Kael raised his blade, its dark surface reflecting the crescent moon. "We can talk about hate and fate all we want, but the curse doesn't care. It's already begun." Serel unsheathed her sword, its runes flaring to life with a pale blue glow. She took her stance, her heart pounding as tears threatened to spill. "Then let's finish it quickly." Kael's expression was unreadable as he stepped forward. The distance between them vanished in an instant. The first clash of their blades sent a shockwave through the clearing, scattering frost into the air like shattered glass. The duel had begun, but neither fought with hatred. Each strike was tempered, each movement laced with reluctance. They weren't warriors battling for victory. They were kindred souls caught in a web of tragedy, seeking an impossible escape. And the crescent moon watched, cold and indifferent, as the cursed pair danced on the edge of destiny. The clearing bore witness to a storm of magic and steel. Sparks flew with every clash of their blades, illuminating the frost-covered ground in bursts of white and blue light. Each swing, each parry, each collision reverberated through the forest, as though the ancient trees themselves mourned the struggle. Serel moved with the precision of a practiced warrior, her runed blade singing through the air. She struck with purpose, her silver armor gleaming like a beacon in the darkness. And yet, every time her sword came close to Kael's chest, she hesitated, her resolve faltering at the memory of his eyes, filled with sorrow instead of malice. Kael's movements were swift and fluid, his cursed blade weaving patterns of shadow in the air. He fought as if his body knew the rhythm of this dance, but his heart rebelled against every strike. His sword was a weapon meant to kill, yet he wielded it as if trying to protect. "You're holding back," Serel said between labored breaths, her voice cutting through the clash of steel. "And so are you," Kael replied, his tone dark but edged with something softer. The truth hung unspoken between them. Neither wanted this fight. Yet the curse demanded it, its unseen chains tightening around their bodies with every passing moment. The moon above seemed closer, its crescent shape glowing brighter, feeding the magic that tethered them to this terrible fate. As the battle raged, the forest itself began to shift. The air shimmered with a strange light, and the ground beneath their feet rippled like water. Images began to materialize in the space around them, fragments of a story neither fully understood. Serel gasped as she saw herself, not as she was now, but as a girl standing beside a boy in a sunlit meadow. They were laughing, their hands intertwined. She recognized the boy instantly. Kael. Kael's sword faltered as he too saw the vision. It was unmistakably him, though the joy on his face felt alien, like a relic from a life he couldn't remember. "What is this?" Serel whispered, her voice trembling. Kael shook his head, his grip tightening on his blade. "A trick. It must be." But the visions continued. More memories, some familiar, others strange, played out in the air around them. They saw themselves in moments of tenderness and triumph, of sorrow and betrayal. They were not enemies, not strangers, but two souls bound together through lifetimes of love and loss. "This isn't just a curse," Serel said, lowering her sword. "It's a cycle. We've done this before." Kael's expression darkened as realization dawned. "And every time, it ends the same way. One of us dies." The visions began to fade, leaving only the two of them standing in the clearing. The silence that followed was deafening. Kael took a step back, his blade dipping slightly. If this is true, if we're trapped in some endless cycle, then how do we end it? How do we stop this? Serel's gaze fell to the runes etched into her blade. They glowed faintly, their light pulsing in time with the cursed magic that surrounded them. Her heart ached with the weight of an impossible choice. "I don't know," she admitted. "But if this curse is built on our suffering, then maybe we break it by refusing to fight." Kael hesitated, his sword trembling in his hand. "And what happens if we refuse? What happens to us?" Before Serel could answer, the forest erupted with a sound like shattering glass. The twisted tree at the center of the clearing split open, its branches stretching skyward as if clawing at the moon. A voice, low and resonant, echoed through the air. a voice neither human nor natural. "The choice is not yours to make," it said, its tone heavy with malice. "The curse binds you. Blood must be spilled before dawn, or you both shall perish." The ground beneath them cracked, tendrils of shadow snaking towards them. The curse itself was alive, and it would not allow defiance. Serel's resolve hardened. She raised her sword, her voice steady. "Then we find another way. Together." Kael's eyes met hers, and for the first time, he allowed himself to hope. He raised his blade, not as a weapon, but as a shield. "Together," he said. The clearing trembled as the curse fought against their rebellion. The shadows grew thicker, the air colder. But Serel and Kael stood side by side, their blades shining with defiance. As the moon climbed higher in the sky, the battleground became a crucible of magic and will, a place where promises were broken and remade. The curse demanded blood, but for the first time in centuries, its victims refused to play by its rules. The clearing pulsed with a sinister energy, the cursed tendrils of magic writhing and coiling around Serel and Kael as though testing their defiance. The air was thick with tension, a suffocating weight that pressed against their chests and blurred their thoughts. Yet, in the midst of this darkness, a flicker of light remained, their shared resolve to resist. The twisted tree at the heart of the clearing groaned, its bark cracking as a deep fissure split its trunk. From within, a pale light seeped out, casting eerie shadows across the ground. The voice from before returned, low and resonant, reverberating through the air. "You cannot escape," it said, a mixture of warning and amusement. "This cycle is eternal. Your souls are bound to it, forged in its fire. You may fight it, but you cannot destroy what you do not understand." Kael stepped forward, his blade glowing faintly with a defiance that belied his trembling hands. "Then tell us what we're fighting," he demanded. "If we are bound to this, if we are nothing but pawns in your game, then show yourself." The light within the tree brightened, and a figure began to take form. It was not human, nor was it entirely monstrous. It was a shifting mass of shadow and light, an ever-changing visage that seemed to reflect their deepest fears and desires. Its voice became softer, almost seductive. "I am the curse," it said, its many faces flickering like a flame. "I am the bond between your lives, the thread that binds your fates. I am born of the betrayal that marked your bloodlines, and I shall endure until that betrayal is undone." Serel's voice trembled as she stepped beside Kael. "What betrayal?" she asked. "Our ancestors made mistakes, but we had no part in them. Why should we pay for sins we didn't commit?" The figure laughed, a sound that was both mocking and sorrowful. "Because you are the inheritors of their choices. Your blood carries their guilt, their hatred, their love. This curse is not a punishment. It is a mirror, reflecting the truth of what you are. The shadows around them thickened, and the clearing shifted again. This time, the air was filled with visions, not memories, but moments from a life they had never lived. They saw two figures, a prince and a princess, their faces identical to Serel and Kael's, standing before an altar. The prince's hand trembled as he held a blade, while the princess looked on with tears streaming down her face. "You betrayed me," the princess whispered in the vision, her voice cracking with heartbreak. "You promised we would face this together." "I had no choice," the prince replied, his voice hollow. "The curse demanded a life, and I chose yours." The vision dissolved, leaving Serel and Kael staring at the spot where it had been. Their breaths came in shallow gasps, their minds reeling from what they had seen. Kael's voice was barely audible. "It's us, in another life." "No," Serel said, shaking her head. "Not us. Them. Our ancestors. The ones who started this." The figure in the tree chuckled, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "The betrayal was theirs, but its echoes live on in you. Every choice you make, every strike of your blade feeds the cycle. And so, it continues." Serel clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. "Then how do we end it?" The figure's many faces flickered again, this time showing expressions of pity. "To end the curse, one must choose to break the thread. Sacrifice not for power, but for love. Only then will the cycle be undone." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Serel and Kael exchanged a glance, their eyes filled with unspoken questions and fears. Kael was the first to speak. "If one of us gives up everything, if one of us chooses to surrender, does the other truly go free?" The figure's voice grew soft. "Freedom is a fragile thing. It is not the curse that binds you, but the memory of what you have lost. Freedom comes not from escape, but from acceptance." The ground beneath them shuddered, and the shadows began to recede. The light within the tree dimmed, and the voice grew faint. "The choice is yours. The dawn is near, and the time of decision approaches. Will you defy the cycle, or will you feed it once more?" As the figure faded, the clearing fell silent once more. Serel and Kael stood in the stillness, their swords lowered, their hearts heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. "Do you trust me?" Serel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kael looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "I don't know if I trust the curse or the truth we've been shown, but I trust you." The moon above seemed to glow brighter, its crescent shape now resembling the edge of a blade. Time was running out, and with it, the chance to change their fate. Together, they stepped toward the twisted tree, ready to confront whatever came next. The forest was deathly quiet, its dark canopy now fractured by the faint glow of a nearing dawn. Yet the cursed crescent moon remained unmoving in the heavens, a frozen sliver of light that seemed to mock time itself. Serel and Kael stood side by side before the twisted tree, their breaths shallow, their bodies trembling, not with fear, but with the unbearable weight of choice. The tree's hollow now pulsed faintly, its dying light casting grotesque shadows that danced across the frozen clearing. They had moments left. The curse's magic swirled around them, a storm of unseen threads tightening with every heartbeat. Serel glanced at Kael, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. It doesn't have to end this way. If one of us gives in, if one of us sacrifices everything, the other might be free. Kael turned to her, his expression conflicted. But will that freedom mean anything if it comes at this cost? You saw the visions, Serel. Even if we break the curse, we'll carry the memory of this moment forever. How is that freedom? Serel's hand tightened around the hilt of her blade. Her armor gleamed faintly in the dying moonlight, but it felt heavier now, as though it bore the weight of countless lives before hers. If one of us has to carry it, let it be me, she said. Her voice soft but resolute. No, Kael said sharply, his grip on his cursed blade tightening. You don't deserve this, Serel. You've spent your life trying to protect others. You shouldn't have to protect me too. And you've spent yours trying to escape a fate that wasn't your choice, Serel countered, her voice rising. This isn't about who deserves what. It's about ending this nightmare. For us, and for everyone who comes after. Kael hesitated, his eyes searching hers. What if the curse is lying? What if the cycle continues anyway? Even if one of us sacrifices everything? Serel shook her head. Then at least we tried. At least we didn't let it win. The ground beneath them began to tremble, the clearing shifting as if alive. The tree's light flickered violently, and the voice returned colder now, more impatient. The time has come. Blood must be spilled. Choose. Serel stepped forward, her blade raised, its runes glowing softly in the encroaching darkness. She turned to Kael, her expression resolute. It's me. It has to be me. No, Kael said firmly, stepping in front of her. His blade, dark and pulsating with the curse's power, cast a faint shadow across his face. I won't let you. The magic around them surged, the storm of shadows growing fiercer. It coiled around their legs, their arms, pulling them toward one another like puppets on invisible strings. The air crackled with energy, and the twisted tree groaned as if in pain. Serel's grip faltered, tears streaming down her face. Kael, please. You have to let me do this. You have to live. Kael looked at her, his own tears glinting in the faint light. You said you trusted me, Serel. Now trust me to make this choice. Before Serel could protest, Kael turned his blade inward, pressing its cold, cursed edge against his own chest. The shadows recoiled, as though startled, and the voice screamed in fury. No! This is not the way. The clearing erupted in light as Kael plunged the blade into his heart. The cursed magic surged around him, twisting and writhing, but his face was calm, almost serene. Serel screamed, dropping her sword as she rushed to his side. She caught him as he fell, his body crumpling like a marionette with its strings cut. "No," she sobbed, clutching him tightly. "You didn't have to. Kael, why?" His voice was faint, his breath shallow. "Because I couldn't let you carry this. Not alone. You deserve a life, Serel. A real one." The light from the twisted tree flared one last time, then vanished, plunging the clearing into darkness. The cursed moon above shattered like glass, its fragments dissolving into the dawn's first rays. As the sunlight broke through the forest canopy, the air grew still. The curse was gone, its magic unraveled, but the cost had been paid. Serel held Kael's lifeless body in her arms, her tears falling onto the frost-covered ground. Around them, the forest seemed to breathe again, the ancient trees swaying gently, as if in mourning. And then, in the faint golden light of dawn, Serel felt it, a warmth, subtle and fleeting, like a hand brushing against her cheek. She looked up, her breath catching as she saw a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the clearing. It was Kael, or something of him, his form bathed in light. He smiled, his expression free of pain. "You broke it," he said softly. "You're free now." And with that, he was gone, his figure dissolving into the light. Serel sat in the clearing for what felt like hours, the weight of Kael's sacrifice heavy on her heart. But as she stood, as the forest awakened around her, she felt something else, a spark of hope. For the first time, the curse was truly broken. And though she would carry the memory of Kael with her always, she vowed to honor his sacrifice by living the life he had given her. As she walked away from the clearing, the first dawn of the new century painted the world in gold, a promise of miracles yet to come.